All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous stories in history, but we're not treating it as a matter of faith. We're treating it like a cold case. We're going to apply the tools of a historical investigation to the life, death, and the alleged return of Jesus of Nazareth.
So who was Jesus of Nazareth really? Was he just a wise teacher, a myth that kind of snowballed over time, or was he something more? The source material we're digging into today argues this isn't just some philosophical question, it's a historical one. And that's the central mystery we're here to investigate.
You know, the source we're examining makes a really bold claim that the entire Christian faith doesn't rest on a feeling or some abstract philosophy. Nope, it all hangs on a single testable event. As you see here, it all comes down to one historical claim, that Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead. So our job is to look at that claim as objectively as we can.
Okay, so in any investigation, what's the first thing you do? You have to establish that the person of interest actually existed. So we're going to start by looking outside the Bible, at the historical footprint Jesus left in the records of neutral and, get this, even hostile contemporary writers.
And when you start looking, you actually find a surprising number of non-Christian historians writing about Jesus or his followers. This timeline shows 5 key examples, all writing within about 100 years of his life. We've got references from people like the Jewish historian Josephus, and even Roman officials like Tacitus and Pliny the Younger. So what did these guys, who had no skin in the game, actually have to say?
Let's start with Tacitus, one of Rome's most respected historians. Now, this guy openly despised Christians, which honestly makes him a fantastic hostile witness. In his history, he just casually confirms the core facts, the name Christus, the execution, and the key political figures involved. I mean, that kind of confirmation from an enemy of the movement, that's a powerful place for an investigation to start. Next up, the famous Jewish historian Josephus. In a passage that scholars pretty much all agree is legit, he's not even writing about Jesus directly. He's reporting on the death of a man named James, and he identifies him as the brother of Jesus who is called Christ. This little casual reference is huge. It independently confirms Jesus' existence, a family relationship, and his title, the Christ.
And then we have this, actual government correspondence. Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, wrote a letter to the emperor asking what to do with all these Christians popping up. And his letter gives us this incredible snapshot into what they were doing. He reports that they would gather and sing a hymn to Christ as God. This confirms the belief in Jesus' divinity wasn't something made up later. It was right there from the beginning.
So if we just stop and look only at these outside sources, what's the verdict? Well, they establish that a real historical person named Jesus taught, was crucified, and was immediately worshipped as divine by his followers. And here's the real kicker. In all of ancient history, not a single source, friendly or hostile, ever argues that he didn't exist. Nobody.
Okay, so we've established a historical baseline from outsiders. Now our investigation turns inward. What did the earliest believers, the ones closest to the action, actually claim about who Jesus was? Let's look at their own words.
Think about this quote from Ignatius of Antioch. He wrote this around the year 107, while he was literally being dragged to Rome to be executed for his faith. With death just around the corner, he's incredibly blunt, referring to our God, Jesus Christ. I mean, for someone about to be martyred, there's no ambiguity, no hesitation at all in calling Jesus God.
And this belief gets reinforced by people like Irenaeus. Now, what's fascinating here is the chain of custody of the information. Irenaeus was taught by Polycarp, who was taught directly by the Apostle John. That's an incredible link straight back to the original eyewitnesses. And what did Irenaeus teach? He was crystal clear, calling Christ God, Lord, and Eternal King.
So the conclusion from this line of evidence is unavoidable. The claim that Jesus was divine wasn't something invented centuries later at some council like you sometimes hear. It was the central, explosive belief of the church from its earliest moments, passed down by those who were closest to the original events.
And all of this leads us right to the heart of the whole investigation, the one claim that defines Christianity. Did Jesus really arise from the dead? To examine this, we're going to use a method that a lot of modern historians use called the minimal facts approach.
These 5 points are so well attested historically that our source argues a wide range of scholars, including a lot of skeptics, accept them. The 5 facts are Jesus' death by crucifixion, his burial, the discovery of his empty tomb, the appearances to his disciples, and their radical transformation. Now, the challenge for any investigator is that a good theory has to explain all 5 of these facts together.
All right,
A good detective doesn't just settle on the first explanation. You have to consider all the alternatives. So let's put on our investigator hats and test the most common alternative theories against the evidence we've just laid out.
First up is the fainting theory. The idea is Jesus didn't really die. He just kind of passed out from blood loss, and the cool tomb air revived him. But the logical problem here is just huge. A half-dead, brutalized man would have to unwrap himself, push away a massive stone, get past Roman guards, and then show up to his followers looking not like a guy who needs a hospital, but like a triumphant conqueror of death. It just seems really unlikely.
Okay, fine. What if the disciples just stole the body? I mean, that explains the empty tomb, but it runs into this massive psychological wall. These same guys who are hiding in fear for their lives suddenly become these bold preachers willing to be tortured and killed for their message. Now, people will die for what they believe is true all the time, but would all of them die for something they knew they had faked? So maybe they just hallucinated the whole thing? That could explain the appearances, right? But here's the thing with hallucinations. They're like dreams. They're private, internal events. You can't have a group hallucination of the exact same thing. And yet, the sources report Jesus appearing to groups of people, 2 of them, then 7, the 12 apostles, and even a crowd of over 500 at one time. That theory just doesn't fit the data.
Okay, finally, what about the most common theory today, that the resurrection is just a myth that developed over decades? The biggest problem here is the clock. Historians have found this incredibly early creed, like a formal statement of belief, that's embedded in the text of 1 Corinthians 15. This creed, which lists eyewitnesses to the resurrection, is dated to within just a few years of the crucifixion. That is simply not enough time for a legend to develop, especially while hundreds of people who could have called it out were still alive.
So, where does that leave us? We've looked at the historical footprint, the testimony of the early church, the bare-bones facts surrounding the main event, and we've kicked the tires on the most common alternative theories. Now it's time to weigh the evidence and consider the verdict our source material presents.
So, after testing the other theories and seeing them come up short, the source we're examining is left with a pretty stark conclusion. It argues that the one explanation that actually accounts for all 5 of those minimal facts, the empty tomb, the appearances, the disciples' transformation, is the one the eyewitnesses were claiming all along, that Jesus Christ was, in fact, resurrected from the dead.
So why does any of this matter? I mean, it's an interesting historical puzzle, but so what? Well, according to the source, if the resurrection is true, it's not just an interesting factoid. It reframes everything. It means Christ is a living reality, not just some guy from a history book. It means that pain and suffering don't get the final say. And ultimately, it means there is a real, concrete hope for the future that's grounded in a historical event.
And that brings our investigation to a close. But it leaves us with one last massive question. If the evidence points to the resurrection being a real event in space and time, what now? What does that mean for you, for me, for how we see the entire world? That is the ultimate question this case leaves us to answer.